Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. So a little background on me. My name's Faye. I grew up here in the Chicago area, and I became interested in castles initially when I studied them in high school French class. And then when I was studying abroad in Bordeaux, France, in the spring of 2015, I was able to take the train to a lot of different castles in France, specifically in the Loire Valley, which is not far from Bordeaux and is actually known for the beauty of its castles. And it was really amazing to see these places come to life and learn about the rich histories and imagine the lives that took place in each one. Currently, many of the castles are owned by either government bodies or heritage trusts, and of the ones you'll see tonight, only the one I lived in is still occupied by a family. In the UK, there are official residences of the royal family like Buckingham Palace or Edinburgh's Holyrood House, but none of those are included in today's presentation. And this presentation heavily favors castles over palaces, and the difference is that castles have various fortifications like walls and other defense mechanisms in case of an attack. The one palace you'll see today is Linlithgow. It is a ruin. So after traveling around the UK, Ireland, and the Netherlands, and Germany, I ended up back in Normandy for an internship at Chateau dAquini, where I lived and worked for a little over a month. That's owned by the Baron d'Enval, who lives there with his wife and sometimes their kids. So this is sort of a general layout of what a castle might look like. This plan is of Chateau de Bois, which we'll see later. So you can see there's the main castle area here. So this would be sort of where royal or noble residences would be, and is typically what we think of when we think of castles. But there are a variety of other structures. They're almost like mini cities. So you can see there's the main castle here, but then also there's a chapel, gardens, stables, and a orangerie. And I'll explain that later, among various other things. And a lot of times there are fortifications as well. So this is a map with little pinpoints of the castles that I visited. So the majority of these were in 2015. So my first trip to see a castle was to Azir-le-Rideau, down here in the southern Loire. And then in a couple months later, I visited the Loire Valley to see a bunch more castles. Then I traveled up to Scotland, to these two here, over to Wales, to these two, and then to Ireland. And then once I traveled back to France, I visited Chateau dAquini, which is right here. And then after a couple more years, I went down to Greece, all the way down here to this little island. And then the most recent castle I've been to was up here outside of Dublin. It's Malahide Castle. So this is not all of the castles I've seen, but I could kind of talk about castles all day. So I made some cuts to make sure that this will fit within the hour I have. So this is the Loire Valley, and this is Azir-le-Rideau, which was the first one I went to see. So you can see it's sort of in the middle, close to Tours, which is a fairly major city in the region. This is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's also known for a really hospitable climate, which is why so many castles were built there. The river means that it's slightly warmer than you might otherwise expect for where it is. Wines that come from this area tend to be white wines. Famous names include Sauvignon Blanc. And they were considered to be the best wines in all of England and France during the High Middle Ages. So that's pretty cool. So what I did was I made my home base in Tours. And then the first day I went to Angers out here and Saumur, and then back to Tours. And then the second day I went to Clos-Lucé and Amboise, which are both in the city of Amboise, over to Chenonceau, and back to Tours. So that was a 3-castle day. The third day, I went to Lange and Chinon here, back to Tours, and then the last day was Loches and Blois, which are the furthest from each other. So the first castle I ever went to see was Azay-le-Rideau. I actually dragged a friend along with me on Valentine's Day to go see this really pretty fairy tale castle that you see as you come down this nice row of trees here. So this was the castle I got most excited about when we learned about the castles of the Loire in high school French class. And so a little bit about the history. It was built between 1518 and 1527. It's considered to be one of the best examples of the early French Renaissance. The current castle on this site, because you'll often see multiple castles having been built over time, was built by Gilles Berthelot, who was the mayor of Tours and treasurer general of King Francis I's finances. Then he had to flee the country, and it was given still unfinished to Francis's knight-at-arms, Antoine Raffin, and Raffin's granddaughter took over the castle in 1583 and modernized it. So these are cool vines on an outbuilding on the castle grounds. There's often a lot of cool stuff that doesn't directly relate to the castle itself. So continuing the history, the castle remained in the Raffin family until 1787, when they sold it to the Marquis Charles de Biencourt, who, along with his son, did a great deal of restoration. And then the French state took over ownership of the castle in 1905. The French state owns a lot of castles at this point. Here's me at the castle. So this is a salamander above the main door. This is Francis I's symbol, and you'll see it a lot throughout this presentation. It's seen in a lot of castles in general, and especially in the Loire. In folklore and in all sorts of stories from Aristotle to the Talmud, salamanders are associated with fire, and they're often believed to feed off of it or be renewed by it rather than burning up. So the use as a royal symbol stems from the ability of the salamander to go through fire and come out the other side. However, please don't put this little guy in the fire, he will die. So there are really cool ceiling tiles. I love ceilings, so you'll see a fair bit of this. This is a cool vaulted ceiling. You can see there's a cherub in the center right panel here, and then another salamander here, and one in the center left. And then this is the ermine, which is Francis I's wife, Claude's symbol. So you see that a fair bit as well, although not as much as the salamander. So next we have Chateau de Donche, which I saw later, which was the first one on my Loire tour. This is owned by the city of Angers. So this site was actually originally a Roman fortress. It was built on this slate spur in the Loire Valley in the historic region of Anjou, and you'll see the Counts of Anjou were responsible for a number of these castles at one point or another. So this castle was founded by the Counts of Anjou in the 9th century and taken over by the Plantagenets kings in the 12th century. It was then rebuilt by Louis IX, who was also known as St. Louis. And then he gave it to his brother, Charles I of Anjou. These are some of my favorite ramparts we'll see. And I'll explain those a little bit later. And this also houses the Apocalypse Tapestry, which is a big deal. So here's two different views of the castle itself. So Catherine de' Medici had it restored in 1562, but then her son, Henry III, took parts from the castle itself to develop the village of Angers. It was also severely damaged during the Nazi occupation, when an ammunition storage dump exploded. And then there was a fire in 2009 due to short circuiting. So this building's been through quite a lot over the time it's been around. So these are ramparts. Ramparts are defensive walls around castles or other constructions. They often have this scallop shape here, which is called crenellation. or they have various types of holes in them in order to provide more defense. This one has both. So this has a window-like hole, which was probably used for defense of the drawbridge, or in case an enemy got into the moat area. The moat is down here. The drawbridge was just out of sight down here. There are also gardens on top of these ramparts, which was pretty cool. So here is one of the gardens, probably the nicest one when I was there. I was there in April, so the vegetable garden hadn't gotten very far, but this was the start of it, along with, you can see some decorative elements, the hedges and things like that. So these are linden trees. They're also called lime trees in the UK and basswood here in the US, and called tilleuls in French. The style is called pollarding, and it's really popular in France. I saw it a lot just on the streets of Bordeaux as well. So this is in the moat. A moat is a trench around a castle or other fortified location used for defensive purposes since they're deep and difficult to cross. Some, though not all, contained water at some point. Obviously, they don't really need the moat. There's a shortage of invasions of castles these days, so they have these really beautifully manicured gardens there instead. So this is the Apocalypse tapestry. They keep the room pretty dark because it needs to be maintained and light can damage it over time. So this was commissioned by Louis I, Duke of Anjou, and it's the oldest surviving French medieval tapestry, and it depicts the revelation of St. John as featured in the biblical book. So this goes all through several rooms. There's a ton of panels on it. So one of the things I really like as every group makes different choices about how to present the castles, I really like the combination of old and new that they do. So these are these beautiful old chandelier structures with what amount to glow sticks in them, because why not? So next, this is Chateau de Songu. It was the second one I saw that day, and it's owned by the city of Songu. So I planned this trip without necessarily looking at exactly what each castle looked like. I knew I'd like all of them because they're castles. And so practical considerations like where the trains would go and making timing work and stuff was way more important to me than which exact castle I was seeing, which sounds a little strange, but worked out pretty well. So that meant I hadn't actually really looked at and absorbed a picture of this castle until I got there. And the train station wasn't in view of the castle, and so I was walking across the bridge, and I realized it looked really familiar. And it turns out that I saw this featured in my French textbook in high school. We were learning about the Très riche heure du Duc de Berry, which is an illuminated book of hours from the 1400s, and you can see it in this picture here. That castle. So a book of hours is a collection of prayers to be said at certain times of day, and in this case it's illustrated, which is what illumination is. So this is September in that collection, and I had this strong sense of recognition. It was really cool to realize that I was now standing in front of something that was preserved in this book of hours and then ended up in my French textbook. So this is a pretty view of the castle. I always think it looks kind of like a fairy tale, like Azay le Rideau does. So it was originally built by Theobald I, Count of Blois, and then rebuilt by Henry II of England in the later 12th century. It was passed around for a while, which happens a fair amount for a castle. And it became army barracks in 1621, and then a state prison under Napoleon. And then the city of Saumur acquired it at the beginning of the 20th century. So here are some fleurs de lis. They were formerly part of the floor tiling. So the fleurs de lis design was the formal royal arms of France. And it's meant to be a stylized lily. You might also recognize this because it's what's on the flag of Quebec, and also one of the things that's on the Montreal flag. ceilings continue to be really cool. They often have this arched style for support with these crisscross beams. And they often have either something like faces for this one or some foliage. So just a nice decoration there. So next was Clos-Lucé, which is in Amboise, France. This has a different name than the town in contrast to most of them, because this is actually the second castle in this town, because some towns just have two castles. And this is owned by the Saint-Brie family. So this is the smaller one of the two castles. It's also where Chateau de Bois is. They're actually connected by an underground tunnel. It was built in 1471, and this is where Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519. He and King Francis were probably involved, and so Francis lived at Amboise at the time, and so Francis gave da Vinci this mansion so that they could live close to each other. And then after the Saint-Brie family bought it in 1855, they turned it into a museum about his life and opened it to the public in 1954. So because it's so much about Da Vinci's life, they've built a number of models, both small and full-sized. So this, for example, is a machine gun, a spinning, rolling machine gun. So that would be pretty terrifying coming towards you. And this is one of Da Vinci's designs. This is a machine gun with 10 barrels. Again, you see the smaller one, and then this one full-sized out on the grounds. And this is a gorgeous two-tiered bridge, again, designed by Da Vinci and built as they were displaying the castle. And so it was really cool to be able to walk on a second tier of a bridge, which doesn't happen that often. So next, Chateau d'Amboise. So this is a view of it from further down the valley. The origins of this castle date back to the late 9th century, and it was a strategic location throughout a bunch of wars. It was seized by Charles VII of France in 1434, which, as you'll hear later, was bad news for his grandson, Charles VIII. And you'll want to remember this part for a little bit later. So this is the front and the main lawn of Chateau d'Amboise. Charles VIII, the grandson of the aforementioned Charles VII, did extensive rebuilding of this castle. His cousin's cousin, Francis I, was raised in this castle and stayed there during the beginning of his leadership, overlapping with the end of Da Vinci's life. Henry II and Catherine de' Medici raised their children, including Francis II, and also Mary Queen of Scots at Amboise as well, so pretty historically important. The castle fell out of royal favor during the French Wars of Religion due to the excess of murders and the resulting smell. The Count of Paris now maintains the castle using the Saint-Louis Foundation. So this is a really nice high vaulted ceiling. These are really high, unlike some other locations in this castle. At one point, this is King Charles VIII. He walked through a doorway in Amboise, hit his head, and subsequently died from his injury after having been ill. So not such a great thing for him. This is some gorgeous detailing on the outside border of some windows. So you can see just every inch of these castles is really ornate and beautifully done. So this is the giant spiral ramp we saw earlier. It was large enough to drive carriages directly up into it and up through the top, horses and all. So that was really interesting. So this is the chapel, the sculptural element above the entrance to Chapelle Saint-Hubert. And so you see a stag, a knight here, lots of dogs. Saint-Hubert was the patron saint of hunters, so hence this particular scene. Leonardo da Vinci is now likely interred in this chapel after the original chapel where he was buried was demolished by Napoleon, but there's some disagreement about whether he actually is. So next I went to Chateau de Chine, which was my third castle that day, which was a long but amazing day. So as you'll notice, there is no X on the name of the castle, and there is an X on the name of the town. And so the reason for this is that Louis Dupin de Francois owned the castle during the French Revolution, and because it was given to Diane de Poitiers in the 1500s, it was not owned by the crown, and Dupin really wanted to emphasize the difference in order to save it from the revolution, which, not sure if you heard, not so fond of the monarchy. She also had salons at Chenonceau, and writers such as Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau were all part of her circle. It's now owned by the Minier family. So this castle is known for its gardens, but first we'll take a look at the building itself. It's also known for its huge hall, which was built in additions, and that's kind of surprising given this sort of small looking front view, at least small for a castle. So this is the hall. It's built out across the river. It doesn't quite reach the other side. And people kayak through these arches here, which was really cool to see. And so the gallery was added by Catherine de Medici, and that's on top of the bridge that Diane de Poitiers, who was Henry II's mistress, built. So this is the gallery, long ways. It had various artwork and things throughout the hall. And the other floor has a lot more art, but this floor had beautiful views out onto the river on both sides. And you could also see some of the gardens from there. So this is one of the gardens. This was my personal favorite. It's got the little bubbly fountain in the middle, and this sort of manicured lawn space here. So the gardens for Chenonceau began in earnest during Diane de Poitiers' time at the castle, after it was given to her by Henry II, as she was his mistress. In French court, there was often an official mistress, so it wasn't nearly the scandalous affair it might have been in English court for today. However, Catherine de Medici did not like Diane, and so after Henry's death, she forced Diane out and took residence at the castle, adding on new gardens. So sort of competitive works here. So this is a pretty little short tree here, just out on the grounds. And then this is a vine-covered dovecote. And a dovecote is housing for pigeons or doves. They were kept for food, eggs, and dung in the Middle Ages. And we'll see an example of the inside of one at Chateau de Chine a little later. This is a giant field of tulips. I was standing a little ways in, so there are more behind me, and there's a whole nother field on the other side. Next, Chateau de Lanze, the next day. So this is from the top of the ruins of the previous castle on that site. There's some construction going on. There was when I was there, because these are old buildings and need a lot of maintenance. In this one, there was a full multimedia production in one of the rooms that explained the history of the castle, complete with lifelike figurines, which was interesting. It's considered to be an exceptional example of late medieval architecture, and it was built in 1465 under Louis XI. Jacques Siegfried bought it in 1886, restored it, and then gave it to the Institut de France, which now owns it. So these are the ruins I was standing on to take the previous picture. So this was built in 992 by Odo I, Count of Blois. If you're a fan of Star Trek, yes, that is Odo, same name. This was the keep or fortified tower. It was fortified and expanded under Richard the Lionheart, but then recaptured by King Philippe II of France in 1206 and destroyed by the English during the 100 Years' War. And then it's on the grounds of the current castle, just behind it. So next we have Chateau de Chine. which is owned by the Indre-et-Loire General Council, and it's also called the Forteresse Royale de Chinon, which is the royal fortress of Chinon. So this is the entrance. You can see it is heavily guarded, or it was originally. So we have these slit windows, which would have originally been good for defense by bow and arrow because it's really easy to aim arrows out of it and very hard to aim them back in. And this is also a good example of where maculations were used. So these holes, in this case, positioned around the top of the clock tower here, allowed for defense of the castle by dropping rocks, fire, boiling liquid, etc., on attackers as they came across this bridge here. So there are a lot of images of Joan of Arc coming across this bridge, and this is actually the castle she's most associated with. So these are a couple of pictures of her. So this is a tapestry of her coming across that bridge that we just saw, and then a painting of her on the right. It's the castle with the strongest claim on her. And a little bit of background on her. She claimed to have had visions of various Christian figures telling her to support Charles VII in the 100 Years' War. And she's best known for having been part of the siege of Orleans, helping to win it and boost morale, leading to victory. So this is the main castle. It comparatively is not that impressive from the outside. Inside, there is a full multimedia experience, and it was definitely the most impressive castle I saw in that regard. There's a lot of focus on Joan of Arc because they're very proud of being able to claim her, and their interactive exhibits as well. So just a lot of work went into the multimedia exhibits there. So these are fields outside the castle. These are great fields. They're known for their Cabernet Franc red wines. And personally, I thought this was one of the prettiest areas I visited. There's great fields on one side and the river on the other. So there's actually great fields on three sides and the river. And then you can see the river town on both sides here, and it goes back along there. So this is the inside of the dovecote. It's pretty large. We saw one of these from the outside in the Chateau section as well. And as you can see, these are pigeonholes for them to roost and have a nice place to land. So next we have Chateau de Loche. It's owned by the city of Loche. I have to admit my initial reaction was, Loche est moche, which means Loche is ugly, but it grew on me. Maybe I just wanted to make silly puns in French. This is the main castle. Joan of Arc came back here after the English siege at Orleans in order to convince Charles VII to go to Lanze to be crowned. So that's a really important moment in French history. Here are the royal lodgings from a different perspective. There's this cool sort of scalloping up here. So this is part of the dungeon structure. It was built by the Count of Anjou. It was a military fortress, and then it was used as a state prison by Louis XI, who you'll remember had Lange built. And he actually grew up at Loche, but he preferred Amboise. So just imagine deciding that your childhood home was better suited to being a prison. And it was used as a prison up to the beginning of the 19th century. So here's a couple more views of the dungeon, the spiral dungeon, sort of a rectangular spiral here. It was pretty eerie to be in there alone. And when I was there were not many people around, so it was interesting. So there would have been mostly political prisoners here during its time as a state prison. Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, was a notable prisoner, and he was given painting supplies and a heated cell, which was, pretty good for the day. And he painted the walls and ceiling of his cell, and that's still visible today. There's also a so-called graffiti room, which has all sorts of symbols and coats of arms and names etched into the walls. So seeing all of that really helped imagine the people who must have spent time here over the centuries. And so that was really interesting color. This was a display in one of the rooms. It added to the general creepiness of the place. The prisoner was animated, and so he would move around, and he also had a soundtrack, so that was slightly disturbing, but very interesting. And this says, I loche you. It's outside the tourist bureau. Next, Chateau de Bois. It's owned by the city of Blois. So this surprised me because I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I just sort of tacked it on at the end because I couldn't get to Chambord and they share a train station. And Chambord is one of the most famous of the Loire castles. Then I came upon this gorgeous palatial castle with the best staircase ever, which I'll show you later. The Counts of Blois originally had a castle on a location, and then the current castle was built starting from the 13th century. This is the other side. It is completely different in character. This red part is the Louis XII wing, and he made Blois his favorite royal residence. And the figure on horseback right here over the doorway is him. I love the staircase a lot. I spent a lot of time standing there staring at it and trying to get the best pictures possible of it. Fun fact about another staircase, Chambord, the one I couldn't get to, is the one you might have heard of. It has a double helix staircase so that the wife and mistress wouldn't have to pass each other on the stairs. This is a really pretty fireplace. It's still got this gorgeous paint and gilding here. It's in the largest remaining civilian Gothic room. We have a couple more salamanders here. Francis I also created one of the most important libraries of his period at Blois, although it was moved to Fontainebleau because Francis didn't spend much time at Blois. Libraries are super important to me, so that was a cool fact to learn. So this is a gorgeous ceiling with a variety of crafts painted into it. You can see that these are from multiple different houses. So some interesting detail there and just really pretty painting overall. So next, we're going to go up to the UK and Ireland. So I went to Edinburgh Castle and Malahide Castle up in Scotland. Then after London, I went down and saw Cardiff Castle and Castell Ceol, which are both in the Cardiff area. And then Dublin Castle and Grinnell Castle, and then Malahide Castle, which I didn't see until 2019, but it is on this map for reference right outside of Dublin. So first, Edinburgh Castle. This is a view from a hill across town, and the hill that castle is on has actually been occupied in one way or another since the late Bronze Age, so maybe around 3000 BCE. And then it became a royal seat during the time of King Malcolm III in the mid to late 1000s CE, and then the current castle started being built in the 1100s. It was the site of important battles during the Scottish War, the Wars of Scottish Independence, and has been under siege 26 times in its history, making it the most besieged place in Great Britain and one of the most attacked in the world. So here's a closer view. You can see at the bottom here that this castle is actually built on volcanic rock, which is pretty cool. Starting with Charles II's restoration in 1660 up until 1923, a garrison of soldiers was kept at the castle, and it was also turned into a prison during some of that time. And then the Historic Scotland organization took over caring for the castle when that organization was established in 1991, and then passed on to its successor, Historic Environment Scotland, which takes care of it today. So this is Mons Meg. This cannon is over 500 years old, although it was last fired in 1681. And in terms of other castles, other cannons at the castle, there is a 1 o'clock gun which has blasts every day at 1 o'clock. And the day I was there happened to be Victory in Europe Day, which was the day of Nazi Germany's surrender to the Allies in World War II. And so there was an additional blast the day I was there. And so that was really interesting. It just happened to coincide with my visit. So this is the Royal Arms of Scotland under James VI after 1603. So there is a unicorn for Scotland, because if you could choose your own symbol, why would it not be the unicorn? Lion for England, the respective flags above them. And then the Latin says King James I of Britain, France, and Ireland. Next, we have Linlithgow, the one palace on our tour. This is also owned by Historic Environment Scotland. So these are gorgeous palace ruins, and I love ruins. They were burned by the Duke of Cumberland's army in 1746 as he was helping put down an attempt by the Stuarts to gain control of the country. If the name Stuart sounds familiar, they were a royal family that included Mary, Queen of Scots, who was born at Linlithgow. And the house was trying to take back over the throne after having been ousted by the Hanovers in 1714. And for reference, Queen Victoria was a Hanover. We have more ramparts here. They were fun to run on, and there weren't any signs saying I couldn't, so I did. This is a humanoid gargoyle thing. You can see the spout coming out of its mouth. So that was interesting and vaguely disturbing. Here are two burned out halls. You can see the grand fireplace at the end of the one on the left. So the current ruins, when they weren't ruins, were built by King James I of Scotland, not to be confused with James VI and I of Scotland and England, who was the one who's related to the King James Bible. So it was built in the 1420s as a royal residence, and the royal family used it on and off for the next couple centuries, rebuilding various parts as they collapsed or burned. Here's a little lion with a shield with crest on it and a little crown above it. So next we go down to Wales, and first is Cardiff Castle, which is owned by the city of Cardiff. So this is Cardiff Castle. It's really striking from the outside as well as the inside. There's a lot of cool history associated with it. It's done a lot of things. It started off as a defensive Roman location, and the third Marquess of Bute did a lot of redecorating in the late 19th century. It was used as a shelter in World War II, and then it even housed the National College of Music and Drama for 25 years in the 1900s. So it's had a lot of different jobs. These were some ceilings. I know I say I love ceilings, but these ones in particular were very impressive. They're heavily gilded. They have rich painting over every inch of them, and the photos don't even really do them justice. They were a little overwhelming. It's kind of like fudge. It's so rich that you can only have a little bit at a time, otherwise it's overwhelming, so you have to take a moment and absorb it. Another gorgeous ceiling, and this is just in a hallway, nothing particularly important. Here is a fireplace. You can see there are a variety of heraldic symbols here, so lots to dissect if you're interested in heraldry. So these are two views of different parts of the castle. I took this photo midway through climbing up this part here. So it's really very much in the center of town. You can see that this is Principality Stadium here, which is where the Cardiff Blues rugby team plays. And so you have this sort of ultra-modern building here, along with these Roman ruins. Or Norman ruins. So this is the older tower on the right. This is a Norman keep. And it was possibly built by William the Conqueror, but we aren't quite sure. So it's passed through many hands and weathered a variety of battles. And then in 1766, the first Marquess of Bute acquired it and started extensive renovations in 1776. His grandson, the second Marquess, and his great-grandson, the third Marquess, were responsible for a great deal of changes to the castle. And then after the death of the fourth Marquess, it was given to the city of Cardiff. Next, we have Castell Ceol, which is in Tongan-Lace, Wales, which is just a suburb of Cardiff. It's, I took the bus to get there. It's pretty close. So Castell, and it's owned by Cadw, which is the Welsh Heritage Agency. So Castell Ceol means Red Castle in Welsh. The third Marquess of Bute made it his retreat, although he didn't end up actually using it that much, because really, who doesn't have a spare castle just lying around for when you feel like it? It has some of the same features as Cardiff Castle. It's still much more of a ruin and a much smaller building overall. There are buildings in my suburb this size. So inside, you can see it's the 13th century castle. The ruins were acquired by the Bute family in 1760. So this would have been the father of the first Marquess we heard about buying Cardiff Castle. And then William Burgess redid it for the third Marquess of Bute in a mock medieval style, just as he redid Cardiff Castle. So here we have a couple of Aesop's fables. This room actually had fables painted around the whole thing. So these are a couple of examples. We have the cats and the cheese, which is where the cats are fighting over who gets the bigger slice of cheese, and then the monkey keeps cutting pieces off the larger one and eating it until he has eaten all the cheese before the cats get any. This is the peacock and the magpie. The birds are choosing a leader, and they choose the clever magpie over the beautiful peacock. Next, we have Grinnell Castle in Ireland, and this is owned by Antisha, the National Trust for Ireland. So this is a side view. It's really pretty, and it's a bit of a hidden gem. I have a friend from Dublin who hadn't heard of it, and Grinnell is a suburb of Dublin, and people know of it. So this castle is just sort of hidden away there. It's an early 15th century Norman castle that's been used for various purposes over the year. This is the moat. It's pretty cool because it's the last castle in Ireland with a flooded moat. So it's really special in that way because most of them have been drained at this point. And we have this really pretty bridge going over it. So next we have the garden area with manicured hedges. And there was also a really extensive herb and vegetable garden as well. And here's another view of the gardens. You can see these triangular hedges that I particularly like. So next we have Chateau dAquini, which was the one that I was fortunate enough to live in. It is owned by the Baron d'Edval. So unlike the other French castles I visited, this one is in Normandy. So it is up here for reference. Paris is down here. So Norman things in France have more in common with Norman things in England than with other French things. As a general rule, think Norman first and French second, kind of like Texas. So this is a beautiful castle I lived in. So the original castle there was the fortress of dAquini, built by William the Conqueror in 1040. And then Charles V of France ordered it destroyed in 1378. So this Renaissance chateau was built in 1557 by Anne de Laval for her husband, Louis de Silly. And Silly is indeed spelled S-I-L-L-Y. My dad got a kick out of that. So there are two rivers, the Eure and the Ypon, that go along each of the sides here. And it actually housed both sets of troops in World War II. And then the Baron d'Edval have owned this since the 1700s. So this is who I lived there with, and Bertrand and Agnès were very informal, and they were basically extra grandparents while I was there. So Baron is a noble title. It's lower than a Viscount, but above a knighthood, and it dates back to the Middle Ages. The French obviously made a pretty strong departure from nobility during the Revolution, so the barony fiefdoms were no longer in play after that time. After Napoleon, all the feudal implications were removed, so Baron is now more or less an honorary title. It doesn't have any special privileges. Bertrand and Agnès are essentially full-time custodians of their property, which includes the castle and its grounds, along with various farmland around the country. So this is the back. This one here was my room when I was living there. So that was exciting. I basically had a whole floor to myself for most of the time. So this is the orangerie. It's where orange trees and other more delicate tropical plants would have been kept during the winter to protect them. Now it's used as an event venue. I went to the fanciest dinner I have ever been to there. It was a fundraiser event, and it was very intimidating. So the garden was really beautiful here. There are a lot of waterfalls and ponds and the two rivers, and so there's a lot of water featuring in the garden areas. This is the potager, or vegetable garden. So they had a whole lot of types of fruits and vegetables. It was very much a working garden. They actually had another intern there learning how to tend to their garden. So you have the vines here along the walls. My favorite were white gooseberries, which I'd never had before going to dAquini. They're both tart and grape-like, so they're really delicious. Here's me at the castle at my little table, taking entrance fees and things like that. So these were the doors. You can see these bars across them, which we had to open up every day and lift the bars completely out. And they're heavy and awkward, and you have to align them correctly and also not hit the delicate, fragile things on either side. And this was a cool door handle as well, because there are all these neat little touches all around. So these are a couple of examples of Norman work. On the right, this is typical Norman ceramic work. The Baron frequently told me that something was typiquement Normand, or typically Norman. So this is a view of the castle from across the grounds. It's really pretty, surrounded by the trees. So in addition to giving tours, I also did some basic upkeep on some of the books and created a cataloging system and documented them, which was pretty cool for me as an aspiring librarian. Most of the books were either old or personalized or both. So the books in general used to be much rarer and more expensive, and often illustrated. And by personalized, I mean that they say something like imprint 451, printed for the Baron d'Edval, who would have been the grandfather of the current Baron. And some of these books were hundreds of years old. I think the oldest ones are from the 1300s or 1400s. So that was really cool to be able to work with them. This is an example of some of the printing on the inside. This page on the left translated says, the artisan Louis Joux created this book as much for his pleasure as for yours. He printed it in Paris on May 15th, 1927. If it is to your taste, all is well for him and you. If not, peace and to each his own. And then the page on the right is a title page of a 1776 book called The Perverted Peasant, or The Dangers of the City, a recent history updated according to real letters from the characters. So you can imagine what the story must be. So these are examples of the covers of the books. So you can see there's a great deal of intricacy. And the current Baron's grandfather actually had a particular interest in books, so a lot of them were customized for him. And he detailed many of these covers himself. So in the middle one, you would have had the imprints made and then the gilding put in by hand. And then on the two sides, these dots would have been punched out of the main piece and then little punched holes put in a different color. And then the scored gilded lines would have been done by hand as well. And here are examples of the stitched inside covers of 2 of the books, and then also a painted peacock feather one on the inside as well. I got particularly excited about this, as you might remember, half of my last name is Levin. I saw Monseigneur Levin. I got excited. It turns out this is actually about wine, le vin. So a little bit disappointing there. So this is a preserved piece of stained glass that used to be in all of the windows. When they replaced the windows, they saved a couple pieces. This was displayed on my bookshelf in front of books, and on a high enough shelf that I had to reach it and take it down while standing on a rickety ladder. I was very scared that it was going to drop it or hurt it in some way. This stained glass that was hundreds of years old and irreplaceable, and the Baroness was going to kick me out of the house. Don't worry, it was fine. Nobody even noticed the new cracks. After that, I didn't travel to mainland Europe for a while. I finished college. I went to work in Martinique in the Caribbean. Technically, I did see a castle there, but I didn't include it here. And then I went to Greece in 2018. So for reference, here's Greece. Athens is down here. Mytilene is over here, and this is actually Turkey. But Mytilene is officially part of Greece. And it has been since 1912 when it started being used as a military base, which it still is. So I took an overnight ferry, 12 hours along through here, stopped at a couple of extra islands, and then landed at Mytilene. So it's an island in the Aegean Sea. Like I said, it's just off the coast of Turkey, but it is part of France, or part of Greece. Wow. And it's also known as Lesbos, which is where the poet Sappho was from. That's where we get the words lesbian and sapphic. The castle is in ruins, which, again, I love. And it was amazing. I had it completely to myself for several hours just to run around in. So here's a gorgeous view over the sea, looking out over the ruins of the castle. So there have been a number of different castle and fort arrangements at this site, dating all the way back to classical times. So the city has been organized since 1054 BCE, and the castle area is probably originally the site of an acropolis, which were often fortified settlements with a defensive and religious purpose. It appears that the original acropolis here may have been dedicated to Demeter, who's the goddess of agriculture, Persephone, her daughter, and Cybele, who was an Anatolian mother goddess. So this is part of the castle that's still standing. Again, I was able to climb up it a bit because there were no signs telling me not to. So these current fortifications were created in Byzantine times, somewhere in the first 1,000 years CE. And then the first major modifications were made in 1373 after Francisco Gattuso took it as a dowry. Then it was destroyed in an earthquake in 1384, killing almost everyone in the royal family and destroying the castle. So this is some of the Ottoman part. The castle was then captured by the Turks in 1562, and it continued to be built upon over the centuries, most notably in 1677 by the Ottomans. And you can see this is some of their part in these arches. So it's currently being excavated by the Canadian Archaeological Institute, which has found artifacts from a wide variety of times and cultures. So these are the catacombs. Remember how I said I had this place all to myself? That included these dark, underground, quiet rooms, which were formerly catacombs, so burial areas. And I'm not saying I'm afraid of ancient Greek ghosts, but it is possible that I ran out of there the first time I got down there, the first time I heard a noise. So finally, Malahide Castle. This was my most recent trip before pandemic. I went to Ireland for a science fiction convention and vacation, and I ended up taking a bus up to Malahide Castle on my last day. It was so much the last thing I did that I actually took the bus directly from the castle to the airport. So this is just north of Dublin. It was owned by the Talbot family from 1185 to 1976, except for 11 years when Cromwell gave the land to someone who was then later beheaded, at which point it reverted back to the Talbots. As you've heard from other castles, it's pretty unusual for one family to end up having a castle for this long between conquering and sales and things like that, even among royalty, which the Talbots were not. So Rose Talbot finally sold it to the Irish state when her brother Milo, the seventh and final Baron, died. And she went off to live on the family estate in Tasmania to be a sheep farmer. And she died in 2009. So as I was wandering in the grounds, I saw this peacock. Nobody mentioned peacocks. Nobody said anything about them in the literature. It was just there. And it was the only one I saw. And on the right, this is a pretty little greenhouse. And in between most of the other castles and this one, I learned how to take selfies. So I actually have pictures of myself with this one. This tiny door in something that might have been a grain silo or something. This is a 5'4" human for reference. So this is some really pretty molding up near the ceiling. The orange paint on the walls is called Malahide orange because it's so closely associated with this particular castle. It's from the 19th century. It's this terracotta color. This is not George Washington. It might be really obvious that it is, but it is not. We were told very specifically on the tour before anybody asked whether it was him. It's Mark O'Brien, the first Marquis of Thomond, who lived from 1726 to 1808. So that's actually a pretty good parallel to Washington, who lived from 1732 to 1799. So this is a bridge behind the castle. There are really pretty grounds, they're very expansive. And the forest behind the bridge actually goes on for quite a ways. It's basically a public park at that point. This bridge was on the west lawn, the area where they had the ferry trail, which was a series of little houses and travel stations and tributes to ferries, which was very, very cute.